This happened a few years ago, right before summer break started. It was the final day of 8th grade, the kind of day filled with excitement, hugs, and awkward goodbyes. Students were all over the place, signing each other's yearbooks with silly messages and inside jokes. My middle school was pretty large, over 1,000 students easily. So to help with the chaos, the teachers took our yearbooks and passed them around between classrooms to give everyone a chance to sign whoever's they wanted. You can probably imagine how that could go wrong. People could write pretty much anything they wanted without being watched. The teachers tried to keep things civil, but I know some kids who used it to write some pretty harsh stuff to people they didn't like. When I got my yearbook back at the end of the day, I started flipping through it, laughing at my friends' goofy notes. But one signature stopped me cold. It was right under the photo of a student I didn't recognize. His name was Samuel Robinson III, a name I'll never forget. His message was brief but unsettling. Hags, I'll be seeing you again. I stared at the page, confused. I had never even spoken to this guy before. I didn't even remember seeing him around. But it was the last day of school, and I figured maybe it was some random kid messing around or just a weird mix-up. I didn't think too much of it. That night, I had a sleepover at my place with my best friends, Kevin, David, and Kieran. We stayed in the basement, gaming, eating snacks, and staying up way too late. My parents' room was way upstairs, so we weren't worried about being too loud. Sometime before 2 a.m., we were goofing around near the rowing machine when we heard a knock at the storm door. We all froze. Who knocks on a basement storm door in the middle of the night? Either they didn't want to wake up my parents, or they knew we were down there. Neither option felt good. The knocking kept going in this weird rhythmic pattern. Then, before I could stop him, Kieran blurted out, "Who's there?" Basically announcing our presence. If the person didn't know we were down there, they definitely did now. There was a pause. Then a voice answered. It was high-pitched and friendly. Too cheerful for someone knocking on a basement door at 2 a.m. He said, "Come around to the back door." It sounded like a teen. It didn't feel threatening, yet. My friends were weirdly hyped about it, thinking it was some random guy from school pulling a prank. They insisted I check it out. Reluctantly, I gave in, and we crept upstairs. At the back door, through the side window, I saw someone standing under the porch light. When I got a better look at his face, my stomach dropped. It was him, Samuel Robinson III, the kid who signed my yearbook. My friends were about to open the door, no idea why, but I stopped them and told them everything. That freaked them out a bit. Samuel stood there staring at us, then motioned for me to come to the side window. You're probably wondering why we weren't more freaked out. I think it was because he looked like just another kid from school. Not some creepy old guy, but still, it felt wrong. I cracked the kitchen window open slightly. Samuel walked over and smiled. He said, "So, you saw my message?" and introduced himself. Then he said he'd always watched me from afar and thought we could have been great friends. I just nodded along, trying to keep him calm. There was no way I'd ever be friends with him, but I didn't want to set him off. Then I asked how he knew where I lived. He didn't answer. Before I could figure out what to say next, David, probably trying to protect me, called him a stalker and told him to leave. That was a mistake. Samuel's expression twisted. He looked confused for a second, then furious. He started yelling, saying he hated my friends, that we all deserved to die, saying things he had no business knowing, even stuff about my ex. Then he lunged at the window, trying to open it. I slammed it shut and locked it just in time. He started banging on the glass, snarling like some kind of animal. The noise was loud enough to wake my parents, who came rushing downstairs. As soon as Samuel saw them, he bolted. My dad ran outside, but he was already gone. We told my parents everything. Strangely, they didn't call the police. They said they'd speak to the school in the morning. The next day, they contacted the school administration, and what they told us chilled me to the bone. Samuel had been expelled weeks before the end of the school year. He wasn't even supposed to be on campus on the last day. The yearbooks were printed before his expulsion, which is why his photo was still there. That meant he had snuck into the school just to sign my yearbook, and then somehow found my house. No one knew how. When the school tried to reach out to his family, they realized no one had valid contact info for them. No one could track them down. It was like they vanished. My friend Garrett is intense. And by that, I mean he's borderline unhinged. He's the kind of guy who brags about being wild and confrontational like it's a badge of honor. He's constantly running his mouth, getting into fights, and practically lives at the gym. Honestly, I could tell 5 different stories about him, but the one that still shakes me up is this one. Mostly because I was right in the middle of it. This happened a couple weeks ago, on our last day of senior year, May 2019. The graduation ceremony wasn't for a few more days, but classes were officially over. And the unspoken rule for seniors on that day? Get wasted. So that's exactly what we did. There's this massive clock tower at the heart of campus, and that's where everyone gathers for one last blowout. By 10 p.m., the place was packed. Easily 1,000 students crammed into the courtyard, drunk and celebrating. It was emotional, sure, but mostly everyone was just glad finals were behind us. Our crew that night included 6 of us. Myself, C, T, R, N, and of course, Garrett. I'm only using initials because I doubt the others would want their names tied to this. Also, we didn't live on campus, so after the party, we had to walk back through the city. This city's got a fair share of homeless folks. Most of the time they keep to themselves, caught up in whatever trip they're on. But that night, one of them wasn't like that. As we crossed a street, this one guy rushed up to us, yelling and waving his arms like he was guarding a bridge. We tried to keep things chill, moving around him in a wide arc so we didn't provoke anything. Everyone except Garrett, of course. Instead of ignoring the guy, Garrett started yelling back, telling him to get out of the road and stop bothering people. That only fired the guy up more. He started stepping toward Garrett, and that's when we all stepped in to de-escalate. It seemed to work. The guy backed off, still shouting but no longer charging. I pulled Garrett away, telling him to chill, but he shoved my hand off and, no surprise here, charged full sprint at the guy yelling, "Crazy!" The homeless guy ran off, and Garrett busted out laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. I'll admit it was a little ridiculous, like chasing pigeons and watching them scatter. We thought that was the end of it. We kept walking home. But a few minutes later, we noticed the guy was still behind us. He was shouting again, saying we messed up and threatening to call a niche, whatever that meant. We shouted back, hoping to scare him off, but that just seemed to make things worse. I'm not proud of how we handled it, but after a night of heavy drinking, we weren't exactly thinking clearly. 1 block from our house, we noticed the guy still trailing us. I told the group I didn't feel great about leading him straight to our front door, and the others agreed. Garrett naturally didn't. Before we could decide anything, he took off again, chasing the guy full speed. Just like before, the man bolted. Garrett jogged back to us laughing, and we figured that was the last we'd see of him. We made it back home and kept the party going. I'm not even going to get into what went down in that house. It was a lot. Eventually, I stepped outside to grab my food delivery when I noticed something weird. The gate to our backyard was wide open. That might not sound like much, but we always kept it shut with a little bit of twine. So it being open meant someone deliberately unfastened it. My gut told me exactly who it was. I should have run inside and told the others. But instead, my half-drunk brain decided to check it out. I put the food down and walked around the house. As soon as I turned the corner into the backyard, something looped tight around my neck. A rope. I couldn't breathe. I flailed, trying to break free, but the guy was behind me, yanking hard. The coarse rope was digging into my skin, and I thought I was going to black out. In a last-ditch effort, I kicked backward with everything I had. He lost balance, and we both hit the ground. I gasped for air, but he was still on top of me. He clawed at my face, and I felt blood streaming down. I managed to shove him off, and he took off running. To keep it short, yes, I ended up in the hospital. The cuts weren't deep, but I needed a ton of shots in case he had something infectious. The police didn't do much, and since I was moving out a week later, there wasn't much I could do either. The worst part? I had visible cuts in all of my graduation photos. Garrett felt awful. He even took me to lunch afterward to try and make up for it. But I never blamed him. Not really. I just hope he learned something from that night. Don't mess with people who have nothing left to lose. When I was in 7th grade, there was this kid in my homeroom named Sven. Saying he was a little odd would be an understatement. He was one of those kids who stayed completely isolated, even when other people genuinely tried to include him. I didn't have all my classes with him, but in everyone we shared, he always sat in the same seat, back corner opposite the door. Without fail, every single day, he wore the same outfit, cargo shorts and a baggy burgundy hoodie. Never anything else. He barely spoke, but on the rare occasion he did, usually when called on to answer a question, his voice was deep. Way deeper than any middle schooler's voice should have been. It caught people off guard and, unsurprisingly, became something other kids mocked him for. As far as I could tell, he didn't have a single friend. It wasn't shocking. There was one recess where my friend Tyler saw him slicing up worms by the edge of the blacktop. I think he ended up getting detention for that. Most days, though, Sven would spend recess by himself, standing near the fence that separated the schoolyard from the woods. He never played, never talked to anyone, just stood there. A couple of kids claimed they saw him talking to someone beyond the fence, but I never personally witnessed that, so I can't say if it was true. He had a bunch of little quirks and habits, typical weird middle school stuff. But none of it really mattered until the last day of school. I went to a pretty large middle school with multiple classes for each grade happening at the same time. There was this tradition among students on the final day. Kids would sneak into other classrooms and pretend they were supposed to be there, just to confuse teachers. The teachers mostly played along, knowing it was just end-of-year mischief. That day, I ended up in one of the few classes I actually shared with Sven. The room was packed with kids from all over the grade. Some I recognized, others I didn't. My friends had gone off to different classrooms to join in on the fun, but I was always a bit of a rule follower, so I stayed put. That meant I was kind of alone in the room, except for Sven. He was acting even stranger than usual. I remember his leg was bouncing constantly. He was tapping his foot nonstop, looking around the room in this jittery, anxious way. Not at me specifically, just kind of scanning the space like he was waiting for something. Or someone. The weirdest part? There were way more kids in the room than usual. I know it was a free-for-all day, but I didn't recognize a lot of these faces. Too many, considering we'd all been going to the same school for 3 years. At some point, the teacher, Miss Bell, I think, told us to break into small groups to do some kind of light end-of-year reflection worksheet. Everyone used it as an excuse to goof off. While we were working, Miss Bell quietly stepped over to her desk, picked up the classroom phone, and turned her back to us. A few minutes later, another teacher walked in, maybe from the room next door. They stepped just outside and started whispering. It wasn't a long conversation, less than a minute, but something about it didn't sit right. Miss Bell looked unsettled. That's the best way I can describe it. After their hushed talk, both teachers came back in and casually walked over to a few specific students. They knelt beside them and whispered something. Then those kids quietly stood up and followed them out of the room. Nobody else seemed to think anything of it, but I was watching. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Miss Bell returned a few minutes later, alone. She sat down like nothing had happened. But the second she did, the fire alarm went off. She didn't even flinch. She calmly told us to line up and head outside. We joined the rest of the school on the field behind the building, organized by homeroom. As we waited, I found myself glancing back at the school, mostly out of habit. And that's when I saw something. in a second-story window, something moved. Just for a moment. I don't know what it was. It could have been a reflection, a shadow, anything. But I swear, something shifted behind that glass. The building was supposed to be empty. I didn't tell anyone. But the idea of going back inside the school after that? It scared me. We never got the chance. Not long after, the sound of sirens cut through the air. One police car, then two, then more. A whole line of them pulled into the parking lot. The officers didn't hesitate. They jumped out and rushed inside the building. No one told us what was going on. Teachers just kept saying everything was fine, that we should stay calm and wait. Eventually, someone came around and said school was being dismissed early. No buses. We had to call our parents. They never told us what really happened, not officially. But later that night, my parents filled me in on what the school had told them. Apparently, a group of students who didn't even go to our school had gotten inside. The story going around was that they had planned to do something dangerous. The rumor was that Miss Bell had found suspicious tools in one of their bags, something that made her alarmed enough to quietly alert the staff. The fire drill was a way to get everyone out, without setting off a panic. And then there was Sven. What my mom told me next stuck with me more than anything else. According to the school, those outsiders had been let in through the side fence during recess. The one next to the woods. The one Sven always stood by. I never saw him again after that day. And that's the story of Sven. The quiet kid by the fence who may have been hiding more than just a weird personality. I still don't know what really happened that day. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. If you found this story as unsettling as I did living through it, don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe, depending on where you're listening. I post more true stories, creepy experiences, and bizarre encounters regularly. Got a story of your own? Drop it in the comments or send it my way. You never know. Yours might be the next one I read. Until then, keep your eyes open. You never really know who's standing on the other side of the fence.